This is my confession. The names in this story are not real. I've changed them to protect my family's privacy. I'm not proud of what I did, but this is the truth. My name is Laura Parker. I'm 45 years old, a wife, and a mother of 4 children. I was married to Ethan Parker for more than 20 years, and together we built a life that most people would consider stable, maybe even enviable from the outside. Ethan owns a custom smoker and grill business, something he started in our backyard and grew into a real company that supported us and gave our children everything they needed. Our kids, Caleb 17, Ivy 16, and our twins Owen and Noah 12, have never known hunger or instability. We lived in a modest but comfortable home, went on family trips once in a while, and I worked part-time at a marketing firm. If you asked anyone who knew us, they would have said we had a good marriage. But here's the part most people don't see. Stability can also feel like a cage. At least, that's how I felt. Ethan is a hardworking man, and I will never deny that. He put food on the table and made sure the bills were paid. But for years, I felt invisible in my own home. Every conversation was about work, about orders, about his tools, or the kids' schedules. I became a background character in my own marriage. I should have spoken up more. I should have told him clearly how lonely I was, how desperately I wanted him to notice me as a woman, not just the mother of his children or the person who folded his laundry. But instead of confronting it directly, I did what weak people do. I sought validation somewhere else. And that's how Richard Hale entered my life. Richard was the new account director at the marketing firm where I worked. He was polished, confident, the kind of man who made people turn their heads when he entered a room. At first, I thought of him only as a colleague, someone whose charm was just part of his professional toolkit. But slowly, he became more than that. He listened when I spoke, remembered small details, and looked at me in a way Ethan hadn't looked at me in years. I should have drawn the line there. But instead, I let myself enjoy the attention. I told myself it was harmless, that I deserved to feel attractive again, that there was nothing wrong with enjoying someone's company. I didn't realize, or maybe I didn't want to admit, how dangerous that thinking was. When Christmas came around, my firm held its annual holiday party at the Hermitage Hotel downtown. Normally, I went alone, but this year, I insisted Ethan come with me. Part of me wanted to show him off. Part of me wanted him to see the world I lived in outside of our home, and another part of me, if I'm honest, wanted to see how he looked standing next to Richard. That night, I wore a new emerald green dress I'd bought secretly, one that hugged me in all the places I wanted attention. I spent hours getting ready, doing my hair and makeup like I hadn't in years. When Ethan saw me, he smiled politely and said, "You look nice." Just nice. My heart sank a little. Even before we left the house. At the party, everything sparkled. The chandeliers, the champagne glasses, the polished marble floors. Ethan looked uncomfortable in his suit, but I felt alive. People laughed. Music floated through the ballroom, and Richard was there, perfectly at ease in his tailored jacket. When I introduced him to Ethan, Richard gave one of his confident smiles and joked about Ethan being the famous barbecue king. I laughed louder than I should have, leaning closer than I needed to. Ethan noticed, I'm sure. For a while, I tried to balance the two worlds, standing beside my husband, then drifting into conversations with Richard. But as the night wore on, I gravitated more toward Richard, intoxicated by his charm and the way he made me feel seen. When Ethan went to get another drink, Richard leaned close and whispered, "Why don't we get out of here? I want to show you something." I should have said no. Every rational part of me knew that. But instead, I followed him out of the hotel like a teenager sneaking away. His car smelled like leather and cologne. My heart pounded, half terrified, half thrilled. We didn't go to his office like I later told Ethan. We went to his apartment. And yes, what you're already thinking happened there, happened. I told myself it was just passion, just one night, just something I needed to feel alive again. But when dawn broke and I realized I was still wearing Richard's jacket, shame hit me like a wave. Driving back home, I rehearsed excuses in my head. I thought maybe I could cover it as business talk, that maybe Ethan wouldn't push too hard if I kept calm. But when I slipped into the kitchen and started making coffee, he was there, watching me. His eyes weren't angry yet, but they were sharp. He noticed everything: my smudged makeup, my wrinkled dress, the jacket hanging on my shoulders. He asked me where I'd been. I lied. I said Richard had shown me some work materials that we lost track of time. I kept my voice steady, casual, but I could feel him peeling back the layers of my lie with every second of silence. When he asked whose jacket I was wearing, I froze for a moment before answering too quickly. That was the first time I saw a shift in him. Ethan had always been calm, steady, almost predictable. But now there was something different, a resolve I wasn't prepared for. He didn't yell, didn't throw things. He just looked at me like he was done believing anything that came out of my mouth. The hours after that are a blur. I showered, pretended life was normal, went to yoga, came home as if nothing had changed. But when I tried to unlock the front door, my key didn't fit. Ethan had changed all the locks. My husband, the man I thought I had complete control over because of his quiet nature, had drawn a line in the sand. I remember standing there on the porch, humiliated, realizing that the safety net I always assumed would be there, our marriage, our home, our family, was slipping away faster than I could grab onto it. The neighbor across the street was watching. My children were inside. And Ethan, standing tall in the doorway, told me I didn't live there anymore. That night, everything I thought I knew about myself and my marriage cracked open. And as much as I wanted to paint Ethan as overreacting, deep down, I knew he was right. Because I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And it was only the beginning of my unraveling. First update. When Ethan told me, straight-faced, that I didn't live in our house anymore, something inside me cracked. For a moment, I thought he was bluffing, that this was just a scare tactic, some dramatic gesture he would undo once I cried and apologized. But he didn't waver. The locks were changed. My own home had been shut against me. I remember standing on that porch, clutching the useless key in my hand, feeling like the entire neighborhood was watching. Our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was watering her plants a little too eagerly, and I knew she would be whispering about me by dinner. My kids were inside. My husband was in the doorway, and I was outside like some stranger. I told Ethan we needed to talk. I begged him to be reasonable, to think about what kind of message this would send to our children. He didn't budge. His exact words still echo in my head. You need to decide where you want to have that conversation, because right now you don't live here anymore. That night, I drove to my sister Sarah's place and stayed in her guest room. I tried to act like Ethan was overreacting, that this was just a phase, and he'd calm down once his temper cooled. But deep down, fear gnawed at me. Ethan had always been steady, almost passive at times. I underestimated him. I thought he'd forgive me like he always had with little mistakes. But this time wasn't little. This time, he saw me for what I'd done. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen missed calls from Ivy. My daughter wanted to know what had happened, why she came home to find the locks changed, why her dad wouldn't give her straight answers. I texted her back, telling her it was just a misunderstanding, that her father had acted rashly. I wanted her on my side. Later that day, Ethan called me. His voice was calm, too calm. He told me he knew the truth, that he had seen enough, that I needed to stop insulting his intelligence with half-baked excuses. For the first time, I dropped the act. I admitted I'd spent the night with Richard. Saying the words out loud hurt, not because I felt guilty toward Ethan, but because it made the affair real in a way I'd been avoiding. I told him our marriage had been dead for years, that we'd been roommates, not lovers. And in many ways, I believed that. I had been lonely for so long, shouting into a void that never answered back. But Ethan didn't see it that way. He told me coldly that I should have spoken to him, not gone crawling into another man's arms. I tried to guilt him, tried to point out his obsession with work, his neglect of me as a woman. He didn't flinch. Instead, he told me the kids were going to see their father stand up for himself for once, that they were going to learn actions have consequences. For the first time in decades, Ethan wasn't bending, wasn't compromising. He was drawing a line. And then came the hardest part, our children. Caleb, our oldest, confronted Ethan first. Later he told me he thought locking me out was extreme. He called me that night, his voice low, asking me to explain. I told him what any desperate mother would, that Ethan was being unfair, that Richard was just a colleague, that his father had jumped to conclusions. I begged Caleb not to believe everything Ethan said. But Ethan, in his calm way, told Caleb the truth, that I'd left the party with Richard, that I came home in his jacket, that when confronted, I admitted the affair. Caleb's silence over the phone was worse than any shouting. Finally, he whispered, "You actually admitted it?" When I said yes, his tone changed. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. My son sounded older than his years. I lost Caleb that day. Ivy was next. At first, she was furious with Ethan. She thought he was humiliating me unfairly. She texted him demanding he let me back in the house. For a short time, I thought I had her loyalty. But then, slowly, I felt her slipping away. She stopped answering my calls as quickly. Her tone changed from defensive to weary. And then one evening, she came over to the apartment I was renting temporarily and told me straight up, "Mom, I don't want to stay here anymore. I don't want to pretend this is normal." She went back to Ethan's house that same night. The twins were different. At only 12, they didn't understand everything, but they weren't blind either. At first, they were confused, asking why I wasn't home, why Dad seemed so serious. I tried to soften it, telling them grown-ups sometimes needed space. But when they visited me at my apartment and met Richard, because yes, I made the colossal mistake of introducing them too soon, they recoiled. Richard, in his usual charm, tried to buy their affection with gifts, expensive video games, even awkward conversations about sports. The boys didn't buy it. They could smell the fake enthusiasm, the way he looked at me more than he looked at them. Soon after, even my twins wanted to go back to Ethan's. They told me they missed their beds, their routine, and they didn't like the way Richard hovered. That cut me deeper than I let on. The truth was, my affair didn't just cost me my marriage, it began costing me my children. And yet, instead of facing that, I doubled down. Within days of being locked out, I hired a lawyer. I told myself if Ethan wanted a fight, I'd give him one. My attorney, Victoria Walsh, was sharp and confident. She assured me that after more than 2 decades of marriage, I was entitled to half of everything. The house, the business, financial support. She said judges didn't care about infidelity the way they used to. If anything, she made me believe Ethan was the one who looked controlling, changing locks and shutting me out. So I filed. I demanded property division, spousal support, custody arrangements. I painted myself as the neglected wife who had sacrificed her career for her husband's business and children. Part of me even believed my own narrative. But Ethan wasn't the same quiet husband I'd underestimated all those years. He fought back with evidence. He hired a forensic accountant who uncovered everything I'd tried to hide. The small transfers I'd made into a private account, the credit card charges for dinners, hotels, spa treatments. Things I thought were subtle, invisible, swallowed up in the blur of household expenses. They weren't invisible at all. And then there was Caleb. My own son betrayed me in the courtroom. He told Ethan about seeing me with Richard weeks earlier, holding hands at a coffee shop. That revelation made me feel exposed in a way I can't even describe. My son had seen me cheating, and instead of protecting me, he told his father. That hurt more than the locks, more than the divorce papers. It felt like the final nail in my role as mother first. The custody hearing was brutal. My lawyer argued I was afraid of Ethan, that his sudden decision to lock me out was controlling behavior. I sat there in a gray suit, tissues in hand, playing the role of a frightened wife. I cried on cue, lowered my voice, tried to appear fragile. But Ethan's lawyer countered with evidence, receipts, bank transfers, photographs, even testimony from the accountant. He painted me as deceptive, selfish, reckless. And when the judge asked me directly if I had engaged in an extramarital affair, I had no choice but to admit it. The words stuck in my throat. "Yes, Your Honor." With that, the room changed. The judge didn't look at me with sympathy anymore. My children, sitting quietly in the back, wouldn't even meet my eyes. For years, I told myself I was the victim, the lonely wife in a cold marriage. But sitting there, hearing my own lies torn apart, seeing my children's faces, I started to wonder if maybe I wasn't the victim at all. Maybe I was just the villain in a story I didn't know how to stop writing. And Richard, my supposed escape, the man I'd risked everything for, was already pulling away. Second update. After the custody hearing, I sat in the bathroom of the courthouse for nearly an hour, staring at myself in the mirror. My makeup was smudged from tears, my hair limp from stress, and I looked old. Not just physically, but tired, drained, like someone who had been hollowed out from the inside. I told myself that at least I still had Richard, that losing the house, the business, and my reputation was survivable if I had someone waiting for me at the end of the day. But even as I reassured myself, I could feel the cracks forming in that fantasy. Richard was everything Ethan wasn't: charming, polished, exciting. He gave me butterflies, made me feel like the center of attention. But Richard was also slippery. He never gave clear answers about the future. He avoided hard questions. Whenever I brought up serious things, like meeting my parents or making plans beyond next weekend, he changed the subject. The first real sign came when Ivy stayed with me at my apartment for a few nights. Richard came over for dinner, and Ivy couldn't hide her discomfort. She kept pushing food around her plate, rolling her eyes when Richard laughed too loudly at his own jokes. Later, when he stepped outside to take a call, she looked at me and said, "Mom, this isn't right. He acts like he's trying too hard, like he doesn't even like us." I brushed it off, told her she was being dramatic, that Richard just needed time. But a piece of me knew she was right. Richard didn't want to be a stepdad. He wanted me, the attention, the thrill of stealing another man's wife. The kids were baggage he hadn't signed up for. The twins hated him from the start. Owen and Noah came over one Friday, and Richard thought he could win them over with brand new video games. The boys exchanged a look that only twins could share and said, "We already have these." I watched Richard's fake smile falter, his jaw tighten for just a second before he forced another laugh. The boys weren't fooled. That night, they begged to go back to Ethan's. Even Caleb, who had been the most diplomatic, started keeping his distance. He was polite to Richard, but cold. Later, Ethan told me that Caleb had become his little investigator, gathering information from my apartment, noticing things, and quietly passing them along. That cut deeper than I want to admit. My own son was working against me. But the real unraveling came when Richard began to withdraw. It started small, missed dinners, excuses about work. Then came the unreturned phone calls, the delayed texts. When he did show up, he seemed distracted, restless. He still touched me, still whispered the right things in bed, but the spark in his eyes was fading. One evening, after another argument about why he hadn't met my parents yet, he finally snapped. "Laura, you need to relax. You're going through a divorce. You're emotional. This isn't the time to be making demands." I wanted to scream. I had given up everything, my marriage, my home, my children, for him. And he was acting like I was a burden. The final blow came via text. Not even a phone call. One night, after hours of silence, my phone buzzed. His message was short, almost clinical. "This situation has become too complicated. I need to focus on my career. I can't deal with the drama of your divorce. Take care." That was it. No explanation, no closure. After months of sneaking around, risking everything, building this secret world with him, he ended it with a handful of sentences. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I called him. No answer. I texted, begged, pleaded. He never replied. Within days, he blocked my number. And just like that, the man I had risked everything for was gone. I thought maybe he'd come back, that maybe he just needed space. But then Caleb, in his quiet, devastating way, showed me proof. Richard had already moved on to another woman. My teenage son had found screenshots of Richard messaging someone new, making the same promises he once made to me. I felt like the biggest fool in the world. My kids knew. Ethan knew. And Richard had made me disposable. Ivy came to check on me once, out of pity. She found me surrounded by wine bottles and tissues, sitting on the couch in my pajamas at 3 in the afternoon. She looked at me with such sadness that I almost wished she had screamed instead. "Mom, you keep saying Dad didn't pay attention to you," she whispered. "But he paid attention to us. He was always there. And you threw that away for someone who wasn't even worth it." Her words hit harder than any lawyer's accusations. Because deep down I knew she was right. Ethan had been steady, reliable, maybe not exciting, maybe not romantic anymore, but he had been there. Always there. For me, for the kids, for the family. Richard hadn't even lasted 6 months. The divorce moved forward quickly after that. Ethan's lawyer built an airtight case, stacking my lies and financial missteps like bricks in a wall I couldn't climb over. The forensic accountant's report made me look reckless. The custody evaluation crushed me. Each of my children, in their own way, expressed preference for Ethan. When I tried to argue that I deserved more, that I had sacrificed for the family, the judge looked at me like I was delusional. I remember standing in court, hands shaking, and saying, "Your Honor, I just want what's fair. I was married to Ethan for 24 years. That should count for something." But it didn't. The judge awarded Ethan full custody of the children, the house, and the business. I got a modest settlement, supervised visitation, and a reputation I couldn't scrub off if I tried. The night the divorce was finalized, I sat in my apartment and realized I had nothing. No marriage, no children, no affair partner, no friends who weren't whispering behind my back. I had traded my life for a fantasy, and when the fantasy ended, I was left alone with the ruins. And here's the cruelest part. Even then, even in the depth of my regret, I wanted Ethan back. Not because I loved him the way I once had, but because he was safe. He was steady. He was the ground I had scorched and wanted to stand on again. I called him once, sobbing, begging for another chance. He listened politely, like a stranger. Then he said, "Laura, you made your choice. And now you have to live with it." And I am. Every single day. Final update. After the divorce, the silence in my apartment was deafening. At first, I thought I would enjoy the freedom, the space to breathe without Ethan's steady presence or the kids' constant noise. But freedom feels very different when it's forced on you. The walls of that apartment became my prison. I filled the space with things I thought would make me feel less empty: candles, wine bottles, new clothes I couldn't afford. None of it helped. Every time I walked past the second bedroom, I thought of the twins and how they used to leave socks scattered all over the floor. Every time I saw a teenage girl on the street with her dad, I thought of Ivy. And Caleb, God, Caleb, I couldn't even bring myself to call him. He had always been the most like Ethan. Quiet, thoughtful, strong in ways you don't notice until you need them. And I had shattered the trust he had in me. I had supervised visitation rights, but the visits felt hollow. The kids would come reluctantly, sit stiffly on the couch, answer my questions with one-word replies. I tried cooking their favorite meals, tried joking like I used to, but the warmth wasn't there. I wasn't mom anymore. I was the woman who broke their family. The twins were the hardest. They couldn't hide their disappointment. One day, Owen asked me outright, "Why did you do it, Mom? Why did you leave Dad for that guy?" How could I answer that? How could I explain loneliness to a 12-year-old? How could I make them understand that sometimes grown-ups make choices they don't even understand themselves? I told him I had made a mistake. A big one. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told me it wasn't enough. Maybe nothing would ever be enough. Meanwhile, Ethan's life blossomed. I heard about it through the kids, through neighbors, through the grapevine of small-town whispers. The business expanded. He landed a big deal with the barbecue chain. The kids were thriving, their grades improving, their smiles brighter in every photo they posted online. Even Ivy, who had once sided with me, now spoke of her dad with admiration. "He's been so strong through all of this," she said once, her voice carrying a pride that used to belong to me. And the worst part? He looked happy. Genuinely happy. He wasn't just surviving without me. He was flourishing. I had expected him to falter, to stumble, to realize he needed me. Instead, it was like I had been the weight holding him back all along. I started drinking more. Not to party, not to celebrate, but to forget. Nights blurred into mornings. Wine bottles piled up. The reflection in my bathroom mirror became unrecognizable. I looked older, sadder, like someone who had lived 3 lifetimes of regret in just a few years. Richard? I never saw him again. Not once. The man I threw away my family for disappeared into thin air, probably charming some other woman into destroying her life. Sometimes, late at night, I stalked his social media. I saw the new girlfriend, younger, prettier, beaming in photos at restaurants and beaches. I wanted to warn her, to tell her he'd leave her too, but what would that accomplish? She wouldn't listen. I hadn't listened either. The loneliness gnawed at me in ways I can't even explain. Holidays were the worst. Sitting alone in my apartment on Christmas Eve while I knew Ethan and the kids were gathered around the tree, laughing, opening gifts, building memories I wasn't part of, it felt like a punishment that would never end. And maybe that's exactly what it was. One night, I broke down completely. I called Ethan, crying so hard I could barely speak. I told him I was sorry, that I knew I had made the biggest mistake of my life, that I would give anything for another chance. For a moment, I thought I heard hesitation in his breathing, but then his voice came, steady and unyielding. Laura, you made your choice. And now you have to live with it. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't even hang up angrily. He just spoke the truth with a calmness that hurt more than any rage ever could. Because I knew he was right. I had made my choice. And now, this is my life, a small apartment, supervised visits, whispers behind my back, a heart full of regret. People think affairs are about passion, about forbidden love. But the truth is, for me, it was about emptiness. I was lonely. I wanted to feel alive again, and I thought Richard was the answer. Instead, he was the match that burned down everything I had. I sometimes sit and replay it all in my head. The green dress, the way Ethan looked at me when I came home in Richard's jacket, the sound of the lock clicking when my key no longer fit. Those were the moments where I could have stopped, could have turned back, could have begged for help instead of chasing escape. But I didn't. I kept running toward the fire until it consumed me. And now Ethan is free. My children are safe. And I'm left here with nothing but the truth I can't escape. I destroyed my own life. Not Ethan. Not the kids. Not even Richard. Just me. This is my confession. And I will carry it to my grave.